Welcome to Inside AI, a podcast from the EPFL AI Center. I'm your host, Marcel Salathé, professor and co-director of the EPFL AI Center. Each episode brings you fascinating discussions with brilliant minds from EPFL and across the global AI community. From groundbreaking algorithms to ethical considerations, from technical innovations to real-world applications, we explore the technology that's transforming our world. Whether you're an AI researcher, industry professional, or simply curious about the technology that's shaping our future, join us as we venture inside AI. I had a chance to speak with Patrick Jermann and Francesco Mondada from EPFL. Both are experts in education, and I wanted to talk to them to reflect about the role of AI in an educational setting. I think it's a super important conversation to have because we're all involved in education in one way or another. Either our own, we might be studying, we might be teaching, we might be in continuing education, we might be lifelong learners ourselves, or we have friends or kids in education. It touches us all, and AI is clearly having a strong impact. So what is that impact and how do we deal with it? These two people have been working and are working at the forefront of this question in their roles here at EPFL. Patrick Jermann is the Executive Director of EPFL Center for Digital Education, CD. He's been working on educational technology for over 2 decades, from MOOCs to learning analytics, and more recently has been developing AI-powered tools to help teaching assistants give better feedback to students. Francesco Mondada is a professor of robotics at EPFL and the academic director of EPFL's Center for Learning Sciences, LEARN. He's quite a legendary figure in robotics. He's co-created educational robots such as Timio, but what's really relevant here is that he spent the last several years focused on how technology and increasingly AI can transform how we teach and learn from primary school all the way up to university. Before we start, I want to thank some of the AMLD Intelligence Summit partners who made the event earlier this year possible. Roche, Zülke, Pictet, the Canton of Vaud, Audemars Piguet, Logitech, and Swisscom. Thank you for your support. We appreciate it a lot. And we're looking forward to the AMLD Intelligence Summit in 2027. One thing we can say for sure already, it's going to be an extremely interesting year. And now, let's go to the conversation with Patrick and Francesco. Francesco and Patrick, thanks for coming on the podcast. So I've just introduced you briefly, but I think it's always valuable for people to hear what you do on a sort of day-to-day basis. Could you just briefly describe, set the scene for people? What are you doing at EPFL? Maybe we start with you, Francesco.
Yes, so I'm professor in robotics. I'm dealing with several fields in robotics, among them robotics in education. And in parallel, because I have this interest for robotics and learning sciences, I'm the director of the Center LEARN, which is in charge of learning sciences at the EPFL. And within this center, we do actions related to promoting learning sciences, try to educate people at analyzing a little bit better education and what is hidden, what the science behind it. And so we have many actions within the EPFL and outside the EPFL. And so in this context, I'm also part of some commission related to education at canton and intercantonal level.
Okay, and you, Patrick?
So I'm the head of the Center for Digital Education. So I'm leading a team of people who have very different profiles. Some are learning scientists, some are pedagogical advisors, some are developers, data scientists. And what we do is basically design and develop services that are used by teachers and students at EPFL. And we also evaluate how it works. And so it's really sort of a fast innovation, test, adapt cycle that we try to run.
Okay. And so what's interesting, I think, for this discussion is you both have been doing this for quite a while. So in some sense, AI is not your first rodeo, as they say, in terms of sort of technological changes that are coming to a school. But I mean, we'll dive deep into the topic. But just as a first impression, what would you say is really the key difference from this revolution to those that came, previously with the internet, right, and the MOOCs, mobile, what have you? What's so peculiar for you, or do you say no, this is just another day at a school like EPFL, or do you think there's really something fundamentally different for education?
So if I think not only the EPFL but the general school, I think that the shock was much more intense. And if I think about robotics, educational robotics, we have been discussing this for decades, okay? And then there was, yes, but no, but yes, but no. So it was much slower. Now AI is running so fast. So the conclusion that we take one semester is not valid for the next semester. It's just, so the pace is just super fast. So I think this is the main, so the impact, so the shock, the amount of changes and the paces are quite different from all the other situation I saw before.
Yeah. Just piggybacking on that, you mentioned that before, when we had a coffee just before, you said, we were talking about the paper and how, even 30 years ago, right, this was very much sort of as a concept always here and in the air, but it was still just a concept that, at some point there could be, computers that can assess, written text, and all of a sudden it arrives on the scene. Did you also have this sense of this immediacy, how it was here, or was it for you more sort of a predictable evolutionary thing?
So it's been a long time since people think about and talk about, for example, individualizing education. And I remember my first conference was an AI and education conference maybe 25 years ago. And then, people would design Lisp agents, and you had dreams about how the computer could model the learner and then adapt to the learner and give the best education. And that was very much in the research domain and not on the ground. And the two revolutions you mentioned, the internet and maybe the MOOCs, they were just about how you distribute the content, but the content was still produced by humans. What's different this time, I think, is that we have machines that can act as if they were human, and that's I think a big change.
Mm-hmm. So maybe, let's deep dive a little bit on that. I think maybe we can look at this from both angles. I mean, clearly we as a sort of educational institution were affected by it. And I think we need to think about this deeply. And I know we are, so love to hear from you. On the other hand, we of course have the students. There's the learner side. What should they do? I mean, there's something to be said, of course, for someone like a student at a university, but of course, it seems like the issue is much bigger, to the extent where people come to me, and I'm sure they also come to you, and say, what does one even kind of need to learn, or what should one actually learn right now in the age of AI? So where should we start? I mean, maybe. Why don't we start with the fundamental question? It's always boring when the fundamental questions come at the very end. So what should still be taught in the age of AI? And are there things where we just have to say, look, frankly, we should just stop that? I mean, I know in reality, of course, it's always up to the profs, and the system is always a bit slower, and these are your personal opinions. But what's your general view in terms of teaching at a university or more broadly, where you would say, this thing we shouldn't do anymore, and this thing we should now do much more seriously? Maybe Patrick, go first.
So that's the most difficult question
Exactly.
that you ask first, indeed. And I don't know exactly, but I think cognition is a distributed phenomenon where people never think alone in their heads. They think with the tools and with the people that are around them. That's my view of cognition. And there, if the tools become more sophisticated, you have a new distribution of what the human does and what the tool is doing. And what's critical there is that maybe the humans still understand a bit what the tool is doing and are able to judge the quality of the tool, and maybe also do without the tool. Like we all know how to count to 1,000 without a calculator. That's still a very fundamental skill that we have and that we teach our kids. And so for our engineers, it's a real challenge. For example, for programming, what do you still need to learn the syntax or a specific computer language, or is it enough if you know the concepts of programming and then just tell a machine to do the coding, for example? And so I think the curriculum of the engineers will evolve, and probably what needs to be taught has to come from the specialists of the field.
Yeah. You know, this case that you mentioned with coding and programming is really quite striking, especially at this point. Just what seems to have happened in the past couple of weeks with people really picking up tools like Claude Code massively, and even the developers of these tools, right, in those companies saying 100% of my code is now written by the machine. I just tell the machine what I want. Now, obviously, like there could be one reaction to that could be also therefore one should just teach more the concepts, or maybe it's the reading the code that's actually more important than the writing. It's complicated in a way, right? We also teach much more actually reading of content than we teach writing. We teach writing a little bit, and they should do it well, and occasionally we ask them to write something, but in a curriculum it seems like 95% is reading, and one wonders if it's going to go the same way with things like coding. But what's your insight there?
I have the impression that we are in a very, very interesting period where we have both people that have learned to code and that are using AI, and people that are learning coding facing AI. And you see very well that the people that have been learning coding and that are using the AI tools become super productive. Okay, but I've also seen my students coding with AI having no clue what they've wrote and not understanding the basics concept that were behind, and missing elements. So I think that this finding the balance, how much you need to learn until you are in the ability of steering in a well way in a good way the AI. I think this is the big question. So finding this balance is like the calculator. Yes, of course you don't compute anymore some stupid big numbers because a calculator is able to do it, but you know exactly what an operation is. You are trained to do the small operation, and you have a feeling what is good, what is not good, and if something makes sense, etc., etc. So you have the basic skills, and then you have a tool that extends your skills. Now the question is, what are those basic skills? I still don't know, but at the same time, I already saw the first example of students coming, say, we did everything with AI, and really thinking about, okay, how do I give the information to AI, the code, etc., but without, in a learning phase, which is the problem, in fact. In a production phase, if you know what you want, and you have an AI, probably everything is going well. In a learning phase where you're learning what is programming, then we have an issue if AI is too present, and finally you get shortcuts there that do not allow you to learn the basic principle.
That seems like a critical point, right? That what you just said, that this idea that we have an entire population, basically everyone, that was taught in a certain way, and now this technology comes along, and given that they were taught in a certain way, they're going to use AI in a certain way. And there's now this danger that potentially, right, that we are teaching the others or assuming that they're going to operate like us, and make mistakes in that sense, that we just say, oh, we can just scratch this and that. That's one danger. And then they do something with AI, but they actually lack these basics. And then there's always the other danger that we say, no, everybody needs these basics, right? And you're sort of stuck in this, we've always done it like that, they must also do it like that. And so I think that's really quite pertinent what you're saying. Maybe coming to this point that you just raised about the learning itself and how AI can hinder or support it. What's your view on that? Because the views seems to be quite polarized, right? There seems to be one group that says, this is terrible, they're not learning anything anymore if they let the machine do the thinking, and they're the others that say this is genius, right? Now finally everybody has their personal tutor. You're quite in the weeds in this. What do you see in the field in this regard?
So with many technologies, you always have over expectations and you think the tools will change everything. But fundamentally, I think the humans still learn the same as they were learning 20 years ago or 50 years ago. If you want, from the learning mechanism point of view, learning is something that takes time, it takes effort, it takes exercise. Our brains did not fundamentally change because ChatGPT appeared in the market. What is changing is the tools that are available and the tools we can use to facilitate and accompany the learning. And that's how I see educational technology using AI is there to facilitate a very much human process and also a social process. Learning is not just, feeding content into people's brains. It's also becoming part of a community. It's learning the tricks of the trade. It's adopting an identity. And all these things can be supported by AI, but definitely not replaced.
Yeah. So you mentioned this social experience, and already before you said, okay, cognition is distributed, which is a really interesting way to think about this. Like practically now, if I take this advice and say, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, what would you recommend to people like me, or just in general teachers, right? Not only at universities, or educators, how they now adjust, their practical teaching? Is there something they should be like? What do you recommend? What works really well now with these AI tools, or in the age of AI, where we have to assume also that the students use AI extensively?
So just to reframe a bit, I think there are problems in the educational system that don't come from the AI. We're in a post-COVID situation. I think that was a big changer. Our students don't come to campus as much. Well, they still come to campus. They don't go to lectures. That's a bit the new thing, and that forces also instructors and the system to adapt and to indeed, students ask ChatGPT first nowadays. If they don't get the answer, they will ask in a discussion forum. They don't go to the lecture because if you feed the video to some AI, you get a summary and it's quicker. And actually, the thing is that if you can pass the exam without going to the lecture, and if reading a summary is enough, then students will do it. They optimize their time. They have a lot of pressure. So currently, we're actually rethinking a bit the educational system rather than just focusing on, how is AI disrupting or breaking the old system. I think it has to go together.
Go together, yeah. So, but do you think? I mean, do you think in some sense that we are doing people who learn a disservice in some sense by giving them this liberty? I mean, this sounds very paternalistic, but right at the end of the day, okay, right, a teacher-student relationship does sometimes have those elements where you say, look, it's not a do what you want, right? There's a system here, and we have some experience in what works best and what not. So there's certain things we are going to allow and certain things we're not going to allow. I think that's part of the deal. But it feels to me that, especially since COVID, as you mentioned, already a bit
before with the just with the broadband internet and so on, have we maybe to some extent also given too much liberty to the students, which just seemed like the right thing to do? You want to give people always liberty, but in fact, are we finding out that maybe this wasn't ideal? I mean, are we seeing something? Because I assume we're somehow measuring that, or people are measuring that. Is there some indication that maybe that was a bit too much of a good thing, and it's maybe better if we kind of, in quotes, force people to come back to the classroom so that they actually have this social experience? Or is that the wrong way to think about it? They figure it out themselves how to distribute the cognition, as you mentioned.
They come on campus to have a social experience, to work on projects with friends. And I think then you also have social mechanisms for learning, collaborative learning, for example, when a teacher in a classroom forces students to explain to their neighbor what they think about a given concept, for example. That's a very efficient mechanism, which is guided by the professor. And I think I agree with you. I think we have to engineer moments, structured moments where the social learning can take place, while at the same time giving people the liberty and flexibility to learn on their own. But that's also difficult. So we need also to accompany students in becoming efficient, proficient learners. That, there are learning strategies that can be taught and acquired. And you need to make good use of this free time.
I have the impression that AI is very beneficial in that sense, is that is shaking a little bit the old way, I think that there was a kind of courses, in an auditorium by a professor, and then people were listening, and we fill their brains, etc., etc. And AI is shaking a little bit all the system, is shaking the system of evaluation, because we had a little bit the tendency to evaluate the performance and not the learning. Okay, and today performance can come from something else. Okay, so if we evaluate everything on the report, which was still the case of some, or perhaps is still the case now of some situation, then it becomes totally wrong. So I think that now we have really to rethink all the elements Patrick was mentioning about what do we give? How do we create this learning experience? How do we bring the students into the enthusiasm for the field, etc., etc. And I think this is very, very beneficial, because now we are facing the limitations of the system much more than before. Before we had those limitations, but we were a little bit blind, or the impact was even perhaps a little bit less. But now we are facing really this, and this forces us to rethink, and indeed rethink the educational system, rethink the lesson, rethink perhaps a little bit the curriculum, the way we evaluate. Evaluation is a big issue, I think, here. I think in the school system, the first element that came out, so the compulsory school system, or gymnase and high school, the first thing that came out was that AI was putting at risk the evaluation system, typically travaux de maturité. So those reports that students have to write at the end of the high school, and that were evaluated only based on the report. Mm-hmm. So this is there is a big issue now.
Yeah, that can be written now by AI.
Exactly.
Well.
And there was already, so this problem was already there before, because there were people that were taking money to write reports for others, but were much less accessible. Now is accessible to everybody in a couple of clicks. So yes, so there is a rethinking of the educational system, and I think that we will have to refocus on the learning, less on the performance, and we are thinking much more about the transversal skills now, because it's true that if there is a machine that helps you coding, probably that your transversal skills, so your ability to work in team, or your ability to discuss, to exchange, to build together, to manage a project, etc., becomes perhaps a little bit more important than the simple coding skills, etc. So I think that AI is shaking all the system and is pushing us, I think, very well into solving some of the perhaps even older problems that we had already before.
And do you think we're moving fast enough? I mean, right, there's always this challenge. On the one hand, you want to say, oh, we must, right, what's your strategy in AI? And you know, you sort of overthink everything and you come up with a potentially premature strategy. And indeed, right, there could, the effects could be felt very early on in that switch from going to, you know, your education at the university or elsewhere, high school, to a job, and people say, well, this person doesn't even know, right, how to use these tools, which is something I think we need to take seriously. But at the same time, obviously, we're educating people for an entire lifetime. So these things are not necessarily visible, right, the first 2 weeks on the job or even in your CV when you apply to a job. So there's a danger of overshooting and, you know, forgetting the basics and, you know, all these things that are still correct about learning. But of course, there's always, in a place of higher education, always the danger also of complacency, and it's run by people who have done well, right, in the classical educational system. So there's always a tendency to just, you know, do the same thing. And then another factor I've noticed, I don't know what your experience is, that sometimes also students demand you still do it somewhat the old way. They don't demand it explicitly, because that would seem strange to everyone, even to them. But I see it sometimes in the evaluations that the sort of new things you're trying are not quite as well received, and they rather like the old way, how also they grew up seeing how the educational system works. And, you know, rethinking education is always nice, but please, you know, do it for the next generation. Don't experiment on me. So what's the right way to advance as a school, to find that balance, which I guess has to shift also all the time?
Yeah, so you were asking about the speed. So there are two ways to look at speed. The speed at which the school moves, I think we are very much under pressure. I feel it, you know, with all these technological advances, and we want to go as slow as needed to take care of the education. And so I would definitely not rush on top of the latest innovation, but rather, you know, do some pilots, evaluate, and then maybe it's still quick enough if we implement stuff within a 2-year time frame. It doesn't need to be 2 months. Mm-hmm. And then for the students, I understand why they also like the old stuff. That there is a lot of value. For example, just writing a math course on the blackboard, the value is that it goes slow enough that you can follow.
Yeah.
If you generate a podcast which you know, explains you Fourier transform at high speed, you just won't get it. And so there is value in the old ways of educating. I think, okay, AI can bring stuff. You can get an answer to your question at 2 a.m. if you want, because the TAs and the teachers are sleeping. So why not? If you're motivated to learn, if you know how to ask a question that doesn't break your learning, you know, that helps you solve a problem, why not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have also to admit that we don't know for some elements. So there are, for instance, how to use correctly a chatbot to learn is something that we don't know.
Is active research.
We are looking into that. So in my group is now 3 years that we have doing experiment in my course to try to dig out. We see that there are some students that are able to use the chatbot to learn better and get better grades. Other less, other they use the chatbot only to find shortcuts. Okay, so how do we bring all the students to the right or good way to use the chatbot, in a sense of using the chatbot to learn and not to avoid learning? Okay, this is something that we don't know. We are experimenting now. So this year we were testing together with Patrick. Two chatbots on the same class with 2 groups, etc. The results are counterintuitive. So the chatbot that was trying to steering them into a the good way of doing things was not performing well, in the sense that when we let them then use a classical chatbot, open free chatbot, they were not using it better, while having a Socratic chatbot but tuned in a given way, then we managed to see that this was transferring to other chatbots, and then the students learned a little bit better how to manipulate the chatbot to get a better understanding of some concepts. This is something we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We are now, and what's important in what Patrick said is the piloting. So see a little bit, and this takes a little bit of time, of course, to pilot with a class and do an experiment and try to get sound results, and not simply, okay, I had the feeling that, and then is totally wrong, or this will change from a class to another, or from a student to another, but having sound results that allow us to say, okay, now if you want to better train our students, this is the way. Here we get some results. Here we know that this will transfer to other chatbots, etc., etc. So this is something that still is a field of research and understanding.
So that's really interesting. Can I just ask a few follow-up questions there? I mean, this is research you can talk about. Tell me otherwise. But so you had two groups, and one was the chatbot was instructed to be Socratic in a sense that it's supposed to help you and not per se just reveal the answer immediately. And what was the other group?
So it's now 3 years that we are doing experiment with our students. At the beginning, we just saw that, okay, those using a chatbot, they can go much faster, but they understand less.
And that's just the vanilla chatbot, the standard.
So this was the vanilla chat, yes. And then we started looking into, but we saw that there were several typology of users. Okay, you had the guy who was the user that was digging into the content. You had the debugger, so the user that take the copy paste the error and get the answer from the chatbot. And then you have something in between where there are those people that try to use the chatbot to develop the code and help develop the code. And we saw that some are associated to better understanding and some less. Yeah, so we tried to dig also into the type of prompt and the characteristic of the prompt that makes that some bring better learning and some less. And so this year we had this Socratic tutor, which is a tutor that is not answering to the question with an answer, but try to guide toward the answer. And the other one was a chatbot that was trying to make the students aware about their typology of prompt. So we knew that this and this and this type of characteristics bring better learning. So we were trying to make aware the students, okay, look, your prompt is a little bit too rough, or are you sure that you don't want to better understand that, etc., etc. So kind of a chatbot that was trying to guide them into a better prompting, but giving them also the opportunity to just click in a suggestion of better prompt and then giving them the answer. Okay, and those we expected those to, when left on a classical chatbot, we expected them to better use the chatbot, and was not at all. Case. Not at all. And while the other group of students that were using the Socratic chatbot, they were less liking the chatbot because you don't get the answer.
Exactly.
Okay.
And annoying teacher persona chatbot. Why don't you think about this?
But then, when left in the wild, they were changing quite a lot their way of using a chatbot, which was super interesting. And for us, it push a lot into this Socratic tutors that are not what the students like. But we also saw several ways of improving the Socratic chatbot, Socratic tutors, because if you are not Socratics all the time as a teacher. So if somebody, depending on the period of the semester, depending on the question, so we are now more and more sorting the question of the students and then treat them in different ways, etc. So everything is becoming a little bit more sophisticated. We have really the learning behind as a goal. We try to connect this with pedagogical approaches, etc. So there is a lot of work to do there, and this requires a little bit of time.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. Now one could say, look, that's all nice, and it's nice that we know it, but at the end of the day, people will just go to their favorite chatbot and do whatever they want. So how does this now translate? I mean, this almost cries for education on how to use chatbots in some sense. Are you thinking about this? Like, how are we training also the next generation to use things in a way that are productive and make them aware that, by the way, this might actually feel less nice than this, but the data is really showing, in the same way that I'm always puzzled about that people somehow think when they feel bad about learning, there's something bad. It's like, this would be like telling people in a gym, as soon as it feels a little hard, best to stop. Nobody does that. Of course, you go to the gym because it needs to, be hard and needs to hurt a little bit, not too much, obviously, but otherwise there's no growth. And I still feel we haven't gotten this message across in education. I don't want to make a blanket statement, but it still seems much, much harder when it comes to the mind and to the learning process. And now that seems to be extremely important that we do that when it comes to chatbots. So how do we teach that? How do we make sure that message gets across?
Yeah, I agree. This is super important, and it's on the roadmap to develop AI learning literacy. It's a mix of learning literacy, to metacognition, learning strategies, and so on, and AI literacy. And the mix of both is, okay, how do I set up my conversation with the chatbot so that it's beneficial for me? And in the guidelines we have now on our website for students, the first thing is don't break your learning. Don't offload the effort. And that takes training, and it takes time to prepare the training. So we're lagging a bit on that side, I must admit. There's so much going on, but so that's on the roadmap.
Okay. Don't bring the forklift to the gym, basically, right? It's not about that the weights get lifted. It's that you actually lift them, right? Otherwise, this is all for nothing.
Yeah, and this is why in our experiment we were looking about the transfer. So it's not only about learning during the class, but it's also, okay, what happens when we leave the students out of in the real world with the standard chatbot? Can we manage to change their way of using the standard tool, not what we are just forcing, etc., in a way that they learn better? And then there is all the question of motivation and contact, etc., where I think that we have still the issue of many students that go to the course to pass the exam and not to learn. That's an old discussion, and something that perhaps AI is amplifying it.
Just to come back also to the design of the chatbots we do, of course, if you do a chatbot which is too paternalistic and didactic and so on, students lose patience and go away. And so we really have to find the sweet spot where our chatbots, the ones we design, bring something. For example, the context is implicit. We build chatbots that have access to the course documents, and therefore students can ask, I don't get exercise 3. And the chatbot knows what exercise 3 is. And then you also have a human in the loop. The TAs and the instructors double check the answer of the chatbot. That's also an added value. And we see some of our students are also aware of privacy concerns, of sustainability concerns, and I think there is a spot to be taken in home-baked chatbots versus the ones that are maybe more performing from the big tech companies, but that have a series of downsides as well.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. And I think, here it's always important to make the difference between the actual AI model and the whole sort of chatbot software around it, right? That has access, that has some memory. I mean, I think, yeah, in the long run, it's probably hard to avoid those really super intelligent models, but at the same time, they can nowadays be used in fairly safe context. I mean, I always remind people, of course, that the whole of EPFL is in a Microsoft ecosystem, right? We're basically forced to use that. It is what it is, right? I'm not making any judgment here. But since we're already seem to be assuming and have some contracts, I assume, that tell us that it's okay to store documents there, then it must also be somehow okay to run a model there. But then at the same time, the whole, as you say, the whole infrastructure around it, how the thing works and what does it know and what does it save and how is it prompted to interact with the user, there I would feel it would be completely crazy if we just left this to some big tech company, even if they could do a good job. But it's kind of our mission also to do that.
I think so. We have to own what happens and how it's designed. And even for the model, I think we are using now locally hosted models at the research computing platform. And the results we get for, math and science homework type of questions are pretty decent. I don't think we would get much more out of a model like this if we were using a commercial model hosted somewhere.
Yeah,
in Sweden.
You're right. I mean, I was just looking yesterday at the latest, what is it now, Kimi K 2.5. This may already be outdated when this goes online, but in almost any domain, it's now highly competitive with GPT, Gemini, and really the top models. And as long as you have the infrastructure to run them somewhere. Of course, if you have some Chinese history class, you may want to use a slightly different model, but it's not necessarily our problem at EPFL. Yes.
But we can bring in, and this is what we are doing with Patrick and model that are here. We can make a customized chatbot that has, for instance, in our experiment, the chatbot has access to the wrong answer of the students in the old exams. Okay, so we have a question that is asked to the students. We know, of course, the right answer, but we know also all the mistakes that have been done through several exams in the past by the students. So we know all the misconception in detail, and we can feed this into the chatbot to create pedagogical construction that are not possible with the super chatbot, which knows everything but is not specialized into this type of element. So we can bring a lot of added value with some very dedicated chatbot that are really super well designed for a given pedagogical context. And this is, I think, the added value that we can bring in. Then we need to build up something.
No, sure. But I think that's a brilliant example, right? That's exactly sort of the additional information that you can build around these. Then in the end, if that hooks to a Chinese model or a Pertus or GPT, I mean, I'm all for a huge diversity. Of course, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not shilling here for tech companies, but I think the core of what these things can do is really in the whole thing around it. And you just mentioned a really great example, which is not only, I mean, are you looking at this mostly from the perspective of the student or for the teacher? Because it's super useful for both, right? I mean, of course, for me as a teacher, it's absolutely fantastic to have that, right, understanding in what way do my students get this issue wrong. That's hugely helpful, but I assume this can also be extremely helpful for them, because maybe it's not just my fault. It's just like, that's a very natural way to think about this problem, and I can use that to sort of help them productively make mistakes. Is you thinking about this from both angles?
Yes. So the chatbot we built this semester that was using this type of information was used by the students to have a discussion about the problem. So the students was suggestion, one solution of the problem, and then we use the chatbot to give an opposite opinion on the problem, but not an opposite opinion randomly, but an opposite opinion based on the knowledge about what the students normally know or what they think. Okay, and so we know that this type of discussion are very productive in terms of learning. Okay, and so we use this construct to have a chatbot that is able to discuss in an interesting way with the students, and okay, this is pedagogically well known as interesting, and we can implement it in a way that is also credible and in fact productive in terms of.
It's true. So far, we talked a lot about how students benefit, but a lot of our effort goes towards helping teachers. And so one of the examples is in evaluation, for example, learning from the mistakes that students do during the exam. I mean, it would inform you for next year's class, what didn't they get and where do I have to put in some effort? You can use it also to summarize course evaluations, for example. I've written a piece of code that does topic detection in student comments. It usually takes a lot of time. It's emotionally charged to go through them. If you have a system that digests a bit what comes as feedback, it speeds up things. Other examples are generation of pedagogical resources. Imagine you have a physics exercise. You teach life science students. You can reformulate the physics exercise so that it's, blood cells moving in a plasma fluid. And if you have mechanical engineers, the same physics exercise can be steel balls going through a bath of oil, for example. And there is a huge potential to empower the teachers to do better pedagogy.
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, so this is great to hear that this is also happening here at EPFL. If now people are listening to us and say, oh, this would be super useful for me, I guess, I mean, some universities are doing this as well. But of course, we should never forget we're embedded in a much, much, much broader educational system. And I think some of the problems we're discussing here goes down all the way. I mean, perhaps not kindergarten, but if you see how technology enters kids' life early on, for better or worse, but I think it's happening. We, probably no point to discuss this here. Like, are there also efforts to bring some of these insights and eventually tools to a broader audience, not just our own? Because what you just described seems like generically extremely useful, right? Not just to the few people here.
No, of course. We have plenty of requests by schools that say, look, can you come and help our teachers in sorting out those elements? We have the cantons. I'm part of a working group on AI at intercantonal level, where we try to support the canton in their AI strategy at the level of the education. And this is a massive effort, because it requires to rethink a little bit some elements, and this is not trivial, to change all the system. So yes, we are currently quite a lot in the field, from kindergarten, by the way, to high school, to help the cantons in doing this. There's one core question is really the training of the teachers. We went through a big effort in the last decade on training the teacher on digital education, and now there is this revolution coming again. Okay, so the teacher, they are totally overloaded, and how do you introduce yet this thing which is not only new, disrupting, etc., but is changing every 6 months. So it's a tough question also in terms of what is the infrastructure that you have to put in place to keep those teachers trained, and I think it is a question that even touches the primary school teacher, because I have the impression that the education to those systems start quite early. We are getting toys that are using this type of technology in the hand of very young children. So the attitude of our kids should start to be educated. They should be educated quite early. And how can you keep one primary school teacher trained on that topic in a regular way? That's one. By the way, this is one of the research questions that we have in one of our project, where we try to collaborate with some canton, etc., to try to answer that question in a reasonable way. Reasonable meaning reasonable as an effort for the teacher, reasonable as an effort for the canton, reasonable at the level of the cost, etc.
Mm-hmm. And maybe sort of gently going on to the final stretch in terms of if we move away a bit from the concrete tools, what's your view on, it's almost coming back to the original question at the beginning. Can we predict in some way the evolution of this? I don't mean technologically, but there I guess we can probably relatively safely assume that things will just continue to get better and better. At least at the moment, we don't seem to be seeing much slowdown. What will, like, it's nevertheless seems like there's a big shift somehow that's coming, and that there are potentially certain things that just don't make much sense to teach anymore, and other things might just make much more sense. I mean, you mentioned some of them, right? And they don't sound very techy, but they're very important, right? Like the social aspects, the motivation aspect, the curiosity aspect, the skill to ask the right question, the skill, what is sometimes called taste, right? In actually realizing, okay, of all these 5 things that are all working and functioning, that is somehow the one that feels best, it's the most tasteful, that people will use. These are all things that somehow nobody really teaches, or at least not at a larger scale. Should that be taught? And then, of course, automatically the question becomes, well, okay, then who should actually teach this? Does it just intuitively feels like maybe that doesn't fall on a technical school, but at the same time, we can't just lift our arms and say that's not in our cahier de charge. So how do we think about this? What's your personal view on this?
So I agree. So I would say critical thinking comes up a lot, and ethics. And for ethics, for example, we have developed also, you said not too much on the tools, but there are, resources, and those are actually classes we teach inside the machine learning class. You go there and you say, in the final report of your project, there will be 1 paragraph about the ethical implications. And if you think about, how this AI is changing society and so on, it's really a question about what it asks these fundamental questions. How are we getting along with the machines? Who is in control? What does intelligence mean, and cognition? What is agency? All these big questions. I think we definitely need to train the engineers and the scientists to be aware of these, and the decisions they take when they design the systems really have an implication. I see a lot of people who are not so much in the university microcosm, in my private life. They will be consumers who use whatever tools are developed by the engineers we train. And so it's very important that we're in a position to make a big difference, I think, by giving this luggage, giving these concepts and these ideas to the people we train.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of skills, I have the impression that it's true that at EPFL you don't have a course which is, team management. Okay, but we always did it on the side. Okay, so we have courses on, I have a course on mobile robotics, and we do group work, and then we train them also to work in group, etc. It's a kind of side side effect. We have semester project, we have diploma project where those students come into a lab and then they see how all those mechanisms work. They learn about presentation skills. They work about interacting with an assistant, etc. So we have been doing this a little bit on the side until now, and perhaps this has to change a little bit and should become a little bit more explicit and a little bit more structured, in the sense that it's true. Sometimes this is written. It started to be written somewhere, but at one time it was written nowhere. And then you imagine the students coming, having this type of skills, and then suddenly those skills disappear. I don't know if you saw this in your experience of teacher, but I had the experience of having my students coming with good reporting skills, and then suddenly from one year to the other, this reporting skill disappears because there was a professor taking care of it on the side, doing this in the previous year, that suddenly changed, and then suddenly this disappeared. But this was written nowhere. It was not in the curriculum. It was done so intuitively among us. I think this has to change. We need to be a little bit more explicit on that. We need to put this on paper. We need to refocus a little bit on those elements. So typically critical thinking, we have no course on critical thinking at EPFL, or at least this is never the topic of one. But behind many courses, this is still one core element, and we have to emphasize a little bit better this have to rebalance a little bit, I think, in our courses.
So I'll have a closing question about what advice you would give to both learners and teachers. But just before, I want to just briefly touch on one more thing, which you mentioned, but very briefly, right? The question of assessment. How is this going to play out? I mean, it seems like it might be kind of hard at the moment to see many paths that don't just go to the back somehow to the old school one-on-one, where you have a person in front of you and you're trying to assess them like people did in the air quotes good old days. And then technology came along and everything was scaled up, and now technology is so good that somehow we say, okay, seems to be very hard, right, to do this at scale, because everybody can use technology to just do amazing things. And it's almost like there's a trend to go back first to exams where you have access to absolutely no technology, and maybe eventually even to just one-on-one personal ones. Am I seeing this completely the wrong way? Where are things going in terms of assessment? What do you think in a time of AI that can do so many things?
I have the impression, so in my courses, I'm into the one-to-one. So I am into presentation, discussion, try to assess learning and not the performance of the project. So I think this is one of the way of solving it. We have perhaps also to explore other form. So for instance, we use since some years more self-reflecting tools from the students. So the students evaluating themselves and then having a final discussion with the professor. This is something that we do, and that is very, very useful for the students to understand a little bit what they are doing good and bad, and how they assess their own skills, and a kind of self-reflection on what they have to learn and how they learned. So I think we have to explore a little bit some other way of doing that were perhaps a little bit not so used until now, because there was not enough pressure, and the AI is very welcome to put a little bit of pressure on that.
I agree. I don't have much to add to that. The key is also motivation of the students, so they engage, and the way you design the assessment drives a lot what happens during the learning, and so assessing the process rather than the product seems to be a very promising way, and AI can definitely help if AI can read handwriting tools of how you have been struggling with a problem, can give you feedback. It can give you feedback on your self-assessment. I think those are promising avenues we're exploring.
Okay, good. So now for the closing question with recommendations. So what do you recommend, right, to the students or learners that are listening to us, right? What do you recommend based on your experience if they say, okay, how do I, right, use this technology in the most productive way for my learning? Let's start with the learner side. What would you recommend?
So I would recommend to be curious and just eat the world of knowledge which lies in front, and just understand a bit how the tools work. But it's such like you have a rocket in your backpack, you know. If you know what to ask, and if you know to filter a bit what comes out of it, it's just completely empowering. And also I see it in my daily work. It's like having a bulldozer of information to do stuff. You can imagine, it would be so cool to have a visualization of something, and 2 hours later you have it, whereas it would have taken 2 weeks before. So I think I would encourage to, that's the new world, and you have to learn how to use it.
Yeah. And then maybe, right, just to piggyback on that, so also this notion of being, like we often hear that in software development, that actually people say, I can somehow now be more ambitious, because previously, yeah, I mean, as you say, right, just I would love to see this thing in a dynamical graph, but it would take me so long to do that, and I don't have those skills, so that's not going to happen. Well, now you can, right? It's being more ambitious. Is that also there part of that recommendation with respect to your own learning?
Yeah, I think so. That there is the limit is a bit further down. I've seen also in many student comments, although I must say that some of them say, I'm still learning, I don't want to use it. So we were asking, are you using AI? So 80% use it. But there are also 20% who say, oh no, I want to know how to solve it on paper. And also taking the time to learn the core concepts, not be satisfied just with the creations you do, but really also value understanding. So I think it's both together.
Yeah. What's your advice to learners, Francesco?
I think I'm very aligned. There is always this this temptation of the shortcuts to get the grade and pass the exam, and I think that this is something that is very old. It's not new. It's not AI which is causing this, but AI is amplifying a little bit the problem. And I think that we have to go back to motivation, curiosity, the basics element. I am the advisor for 300 students in terms of choosing the courses, and often they tell me, "Is this courses the right way to build up my CV?" I say, we don't care. We don't care. Take something that just allow you that you like, and where you like to learn, and when you can express your curiosity, and where you can really do. We are at the level of the master. The basics are there. So try to really just enjoy learning and push your curiosity, and not build up your CV in such a way that we will get the job that you will never get. So I think that we are really into that, and I'm quite happy that we are back to the basics of the motivation and curiosity with AI.
Good. And for the teachers, so those on the other side of the equation, what do you recommend there?
I think that for the teacher there is also the risk of those shortcuts, and I think that when some teachers start at the beginning, when we had AI, and then people said, AI will be able to, I don't know, answer to the students immediately instead of me, and will allow me to correct my exams, etc., etc. Not understanding that this has an impact. So answering immediately to the students, we know from the learning sciences that this can be negative. So thinking a little bit, waiting a little bit is something that is very, very useful in terms of learning. So we have to be careful that some shortcut that we can take also from the teacher side could be really bad for the learning of the students. So we have to be extremely careful how do we adapt. And I think that some core elements, so getting back to the evaluation of the process and not the performance, and so these are the, I think we should really understand that this is the core message, the core task, and not simply using the AI tools to shortcut some of our tasks, and then, by the way, losing something that we were not aware of. Typically, I don't know, the fact that we accelerate the correction and suddenly there is no human in the loop anymore, or we find some legal tricks, but then at the end is not done properly, and we just accelerate one process, but we don't look into the learning process in itself.
Yeah. And what would you recommend to teachers, Patrick?
So it's tough times for teachers. I think the world is changing fast. There's a lot of pressure. So I would recommend to be open for change, because I think if you try to keep on the old ways and start being crispé, we say in French, you might be miserable in the end. So be open and care for the students. Because they are fantastic. They have to live in this new world. And so we need to be compassionate and empathic with them. And so I think most of the teachers are like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really a fascinating time. And to some extent, I mean, we're all learners again when it comes to this new world. But all the more important, we have the kind of work that is happening here and that both of you are doing. So thanks very much for that. And thanks a lot for this conversation. I feel like we could go on for a long time. We've clearly just scratched the surface. So hopefully we can repeat this sometime soon, because this train is not going to stop anytime soon. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.